Do you want to start with any? Julie, do you want to start with any?
Well, the big announcement is come join us for the high holidays if you haven't signed up already. We know many of you already are, and so we're looking forward to that. And then wishing everyone a Shana Tova. Can't believe we're a week out.
I know, it's unbelievable. Okay, so fine. I will, hopefully people will know that there's class and we'll carry on. Okay, guys, I skipped a little bit because not that each Mishnah didn't have incredible power and value, but I tried to find one that I thought was very relevant. And there's a series of verses that I think we can really apply to our times and our lives. So I'm going to skip to chapter 3, if you have your book, chapter 3, Mishnah 11, from Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, who was a Talmud, who was a student of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, and was one of his great students. And I'm going to read it in Hebrew. Okay, Rabbi.
What page, Ellie?
Oh, sorry, it's page 70 and 71
Thank you.
in the book. Okay. Okay, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa Omer. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said, Kol sheyira chato, kodemet lahachmato. For one who puts fear of sin before wisdom, we're going to understand exactly what that means. For a person who puts fear of heaven before wisdom, or it's translated in our green book as wisdom, but really chokhmah is better translated as knowledge. Das is more wisdom. So I'm going to change they had their reasons, but I'm going to change the word from wisdom to knowledge, because that's really what chokhmah represents. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said, for one who puts fear of God before knowledge, hachmato mitkayemet, his wisdom will endure. V'kol shehachmato kodemet liyirat chato, and for a person who puts knowledge or wisdom before fear of heaven, ein hachmato mitkayemet, his wisdom, his knowledge will not endure. I'm thinking now as I'm reading it out loud, I think I understood why they use the word wisdom. I think there really is a great difference between knowledge and wisdom, knowledge being more the accumulation and the understanding of information, and wisdom being the integrated, living the wisdom, living the knowledge that we learn intellectually. Wisdom is putting it into practice. But the word chokhmah, which is used in our Mishnah, really does mean knowledge. So Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is basically saying the following: if a person puts a fear of God, a sense of morality that doesn't change, an awareness and a loyalty to a transcendent source, that one is not the first and last arbiter of what they're going to do, but that there is transcendent authority and there is a God above you. For a person who puts that at the bottom of their building, so to speak, and then seeks to learn and integrate that knowledge, this learning or this wisdom is going to last. But for a person who puts knowledge and wisdom before a fear of God, this is wisdom that won't last. So on the simplest level, we really don't have to look so far in our history to understand that some of the smartest, most cultured, most sophisticated cultures have ultimately become the most evil. Something that comes to my mind is the Wannsee Conference, where the final solution was concretized, and 11 of those 13 concretizers of the final solution had PhDs from Berlin or Germany. So the idea that, well, I think maybe on the most practical level, what this is essentially saying is there is absolutely nothing of intrinsic value to knowledge and wisdom that doesn't have morality that precedes it. It's either just not valuable or it's downright dangerous. And you could even draw a correlation that the depths of the evil that we saw in Germany and many, many other cultures that preceded it, maybe not even culminating, but certainly climaxing in the experience with the Nazis, to the degree that they were cultured and sophisticated and knowledgeable, was the degree to which they used that knowledge to create destruction. So Judaism is laying a groundwork first and foremost, which is the knowledge can even be incredibly destructive if it's not predicated on yirat chet, on a fear of God, on a fear of reward and punishment. And it's interesting, the words that it uses is yirat chet or yirat chato, which means fear of sin. In essence, what this is saying is if a person doesn't live with schar va'onash, reward and punishment, which really in its most elemental level means my actions have absolute weight. They totally matter. What I say and what I do doesn't just go away. Yes, we absolutely are committed to a concept of tshuva. Tshuva precedes the creation of the world. The world couldn't exist for a moment without the ability to repent and return and erase those sins and even make oneself even greater, the Talmud tells us, than before we had sinned. Yes, tshuva exists, but we don't believe in let bygones be bygones. Oh, I didn't really mean it. Move on. If a person doesn't live with, there's a God above me, my actions are absolutely important, and there are consequences, reward and punishment to what I do. And there's a God who is sustaining me, sustaining the world in love, and what we do brings the world to its ultimate conclusion, and it matters on the personal level and on the collective level. If a person doesn't live with that and seeks to learn and accumulate knowledge without that, the first thing our sages are telling us is this is at best not going to endure, but at worst, this is going to wreak havoc on society. Why is this true? Well, probably one of the best ways to understand this is the mitzvah of tzitzit. It's a mitzvah of tzitzis, that a man is obligated, according to Jewish law, to wear a fringed garment with these things called tzitzit, essentially to remind him of a God above, of a God that cares, of a God that insists that all of our actions are of total value and matter, and there's reward and punishment. And it says in the Shema, in the mitzvah of tzitzis, it says, Lo sasuru, acharei levavchem, v'acharei einechem. Don't go astray after your heart, which really says after your hearts, and that's a different discussion, after your eyes. And the sages say, when a human being wants to sin, wants to do something wrong, first their eyes see, then their heart craves, then their intellect rationalizes, and their body runs to do the sin. Okay, the eye sees, the heart craves, the intellect rationalizes, and the body runs. So what does this mean? That the mind, that wisdom, that knowledge is very connected to desire, that what we want to be true, we will make true. So much so that one of the rabbis calls wisdom the handmaiden of desire. running to do the will of desire, meaning when you want something, you'll use your intellect to make it true. And of course, we point to Nazi Germany because it's the most austere, extreme example of the ability to use one's intellect to call abject evil good. So much, it wasn't just that it was acceptable, it was a good deed to do the atrocities that were done with no consciousness. How? Because at the end of the day, the intellect will be the handmaiden of your desire. It will, you will essentially use your intellect to rationalize what you want and what you desire, and it will be subservient to your desire, unless there is a touch point that doesn't change. There's truth and morality that doesn't change. And our job is to refer to that and build our knowledge upon that. It doesn't mean that all knowledge accumulation is religious. It only means that everything you believe, everything you read in the newspaper, every conviction that you have should be checked against the checks and balances system of the absolute morality of our Torah. One of the reasons we should, the Talmud tells us, don't trust yourself until the day you die. A person should always have, sorry about that. Turn my phone off. A person should always have a measure of skepticism about what they believe to be true. Why? Because so much of what we believe is rooted in what we want to believe. We believe, as they say, you believe what you want to believe. What does you believe what you want to believe means? It means that you will use your intellect to come to a conclusion based on what you want that conclusion to be. And so there has to be something that weighs more than the pursuit of knowledge. Because if human being, another verse of the Talmud that's very powerful is that nothing stands in the way of will, of desire. When you want something to be true, you'll intellectualize whatever you want to be true. And so Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is here saying, you want your wisdom to endure, that you want it to be mikayemet, you want it to be an enduring wisdom. There has that it has to be preceded on a commitment to a morality that does not change. You want to put your knowledge, your pursuit of knowledge and wisdom before that. You want to build the building before that. That wisdom doesn't endure. And in truth, that is what we see historically, that some of the wisest, most knowledge-filled cultures, I'm thinking of Greece in particular. So it's very interesting that the menorah that was in the temple, which by the way, has seven, I can't think, branches. 7 branches as opposed to what we have, the menorah that we like, but the menorah in the temple had 7 branches, and 6 of them, 3 and 3, represent the 6 pursuits of secular knowledge. So it was physics, and it was astronomy, and I can't remember what else. So the Talmud tells us that the 6 branches represent the 6 pursuits of secular knowledge, meaning that they have incredible value. But the 3 and the 3 point towards and are directed toward the middle stalk, which represents yiras chet, which represents fear of God. That when the essence is fear of God, and the pursuit of knowledge turns toward it, almost not obedient isn't the right word, but is directed toward it, then the light of the menorah fills the world. It fills the world. So this is really a reminder to us, not just that probably Greek culture more than any other culture represented all the things that we have today, all the great forms of knowledge and democracy and so much of what we have today, and yet it didn't endure. Greece didn't endure, and Rome didn't endure, and all the empires didn't endure because of this Mishnah that we're reading, that we're learning right now. So the idea of placing knowledge before the truth of the one God and a morality that doesn't change, this was the essential message of ancient Greece, which is man with his fantastic ability to reason, to use his mind to reason and create an understanding and order of the world that leads the way in the pursuit of knowledge. And we saw that, lo and behold, that did not endure. And so this is true on a collective level, but it's also true for us. So you see, before we get into us personally, you see that man on his own can't develop his own objective system. It's very naive of us and very ignorant of us to believe that we're the one great exception and that we can carve out a system of morality, an objective system without fear of God, without absolute morality. And even if we look to our own Constitution, which is, very controversial right now, and just in some interesting ways, but how rooted it is in biblical truths and biblical principles. So if a person says, well, we're doing well without it, there's a great degree of naivete, because it was very much the culture that we have today was very much rooted in the values that ultimately come from our Torah. So it is there. So all of our figures say as much. King Solomon says, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. Reishis Chachma, the beginning of wisdom, is the fear of God. Check yourself, because the human being has a tendency to think that the way they see things is right, and the human being has something that is stronger than anything else, which is what they want to see as right. And so even though knowledge and wisdom seem like they weigh more than desire, in fact, wisdom and knowledge become the handmaiden of desire. And a person can never totally trust their desires, not until the day they die. Oh, he's old, he's weak. No, not at all, the Talmud says. Until the day you die, you should also always have a measure of skepticism about the power of your desire. So this is always true. And even Abraham, in the classic story of the Philistines with Avimelech, when he enters into the Philistine camp and he hides his wife Sarah, and saying, right, because she was so beautiful, and then insists that she not be known as his wife. And Avimelech ultimately is very hurt, because he says, we are a society that would never take a man's wife. We have rules of law. It's against the law to take a man's wife. Later on, when it became clear that Sarah had been hidden, and that Abraham ultimately said that Sarah was his sister, not his wife, Avimelech turns and says to him, we live in a culture that it's illegal to take a man's wife. And Abraham says the famous words, I called her my sister because I saw there was no fear of God here, lest I be killed. In other words, it's true. You have a law that you can't take another man's wife. But if you desire her, you'll kill her, and then you'll take my widow. In other words, what Abraham was essentially saying is, even under the guise of the rule of law, nothing weighs more than desire. And the ability for the intellect to rationalize what the desire wants cannot be underestimated. So we also, from the perspective of how we live today, we also need to always stop and say, is what I'm believing, does it match and make sense from the viewpoint of absolute morality, of transcendent morality? Am I fooling myself? Does it feel right? And maybe it isn't right. We always have to understand that the nature of what lasts is truth. And we said this a million times, but it's always so powerful that the word truth begins with an aleph. In the middle is the mem, which is the middle letter of the alphabet, and the taf is at the end, the first letter, the middle letter, and the last letter of the alphabet, indicating security and stability. And we've said this many times, but the aleph has two legs. The mem has two legs. The taf has two legs. So here we have emet, emes, standing firmly on the ground with two legs on each letter, the first and the middle and the last letter of the alphabet. Meaning to say that when something is really true, it's going to endure. When something is really true, it's going to endure. When something is not true, it might feel true to you, and that's why it's so important to put your yiras chet, lifnei, before your chachma, before your knowledge, before your wisdom. It's so important that you always live with the hierarchy of what goes first and what goes second. And always be skeptical about yourself when you flip them. Why? Because even when something feels right, if it's not grounded in the absolute truth of absolute morality, which I know is something that people struggle with, but I'm giving this as an assumption right now, then it won't last. Just like so many of the previous empires have, in Mark Twain's words, risen to splendor and all sorts of awesomeness, but ultimately crumble. All these things that we thought would never crumble, right? We have the Soviet Union, we have Nazi Germany, all the way to the Byzantine Empire and the Egyptian Empire, and we have Greece, and we have Rome, and we have the Seleucid Empire. We have all these great empires that we can't even. They were so powerful for hundreds of years. Ultimately, they fall, and the Jew remains, because what is ultimately true lasts, and what isn't true might look true, but you'll see that it's never enduring by its very nature. And that is also represented by the word for falsehood, which is a shin, which exists at a point, a kuf, which exists at a bottom point, and a resh, which exists at a bottom point. One point only, as if they're standing on one leg. And shin, kuf, and resh are all toward the end of the alphabet, as if to say, we might teeter for 100, 200, 300, 400, even 500 years, but ultimately we won't endure. So we have a formula, which is to put first things first, and in our own lives, to use our Torah as a litmus test. Is what I'm believing something that I want to believe, but it doesn't match the litmus test of the absolute morality of our Torah? Well, then I have to be real with myself. The eye sees, the heart desires, the mind rationalizes, the body goes. This is in our Shema when we say, Lo sasu racharei lavavchem v'acharei einechem. Don't be led astray. And our commentators say, this is the sequence. You see something, you desire it. Your mind rationalizes it. Your mind is the handmaiden to your desire, and the body seeks to obtain it. So this is number one. And what I want to do is just make a little bit of a personal point about our personal lives, and then I want to open it up to the group. So I'm using this a little liberally here, but I thought about it a lot in terms of the work that I do as a coach and in my own life and with my clients. And I think that this is very, very important. So this is from me. This is not from our commentators. So you can take it if you want it. You can disregard it if you don't. But here we go. I'm going to change the wording a little bit. For a person who puts God's truth before their thinking, what they think about, their view, their beliefs are truthful. They'll endure. I'll say that again. So I'll read it in Hebrew, in the real Hebrew, and then I'm going to extrapolate it into very personal terms. For a person who puts God's truth before what they think is true about themselves, then what they think of themselves, for a person who puts God's truth before their truth will endure. But for a person who puts what they think about themselves before God's truth, it won't endure. Now, what am I talking about here? So some of you know, I've had some of you as clients, I've had some of you as clients previously, but we talk about all the time, we talk about the fact that the human being, and a lot of you are probably tired of me hearing this, saying this, but I don't think you can hear it enough, but maybe I'm biased. The human being is created and begins its gestation in the womb. And even on an intrauterine level, there are many, many influences. If the mother is dependent on substances, or if she has a great deal of stress and dysregulation, abuse or violence, the fetus gets regulated accordingly, meaning they'll be born with a dysregulated stress response. And in the first months of life, if the caregivers are consistent and regulated and attuned to the needs of the child, then that child will make neural networks that say, when I need something, I receive it. In essence, the world is good, the world is safe, the world is predictable, and my stress regulatory system is regulated. But if in utero, if a fetus is born with a great deal of is gestating with a great deal of dysregulation, or born into a world where caregivers are inconsistent or don't respond, then those neural networks of dysregulation and stress are built very early on. And the reason I'm saying this is to emphasize that the human being starts developing in utero. Who they are and the kind of person they become begins as early as before they're born, responsive to the environment that they are surrounded by. And in the first, I always say that early childhood is the most important job you could ever work in. Unfortunately, it's the lowest pay, but I don't think there's anything more important. Parenthood and early childhood, like what could be more important? So, and also in early childhood, it's almost as if, from 0 to 3, then 3 to 6, and increasingly less, but in the early years, if this young child's caregivers are attuned and aware and respond to the needs with love and internal regulation, the neural networks of this little human being are wiring and firing to be regulated. But the opposite is also true. And we've talked about in previous discussions, but this can't be said enough, that as the child grows, they're always seeking to make sense of the world. Is this safe? Am I safe? Is this good? A child is always trying to make sense of the world. And because they're children, they don't have the ability to make rational interpretations. So if they're a little child in school and the teacher yells at them, the child doesn't have the ability to say, this is not about me. This is a dysregulated teacher, out of control. I'm okay. No, the child says, I'm stupid. I'm an idiot. And those beliefs, those traumas really get wired and built and concretized within the neurology of a human being. And as the human being grows and becomes 8 years old and 10 years old and 15 years old and 20 years old, 30, 50, 60, however long, those beliefs, that the interpretations that they formed inaccurately because they were children without cognitive development, without ability to interpret rationally, those beliefs become the beliefs of the adult. And a person will essentially believe untrue beliefs about themselves. I'm not worthy, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I come second, I'm not important. These are things that people will carry with them based on what we call salient memory. Salient memory means if a young person experiences something that feels really, really bad, and they remember, and that really bad feeling, coupled with a belief of what happened, you see, I'm not smart enough, those come together to form a belief that remains with the human being and actually guides and dictates their behavior, even when they're, 60 years old. So we, in essence, from a Judaic perspective, what's coming up here is that God creates the human being inevitably going to trip up because of the nature of how human beings develop. And they ultimately, the safer the environment in the early years, even the first months, the better off the human being is. But all people experience at an early time some sort of adversity that feels bad and gets coupled with a negative belief because a child can't think rationally or interpret rationally. And that gets concretized in their brain and guides their behavior. So in essence, what this is saying here is that for a person who puts the truth about themselves, what is the truth about myself? I am created in the image of God. I am created with a piece of God himself within me. My value is absolute. My value is not subject for dispute. I am infinitely worthy of love, good, and respect because I am a creation of God himself. So for a person who puts that knowledge of truth, Aleph, Mem, Taf, this is the reality. Before their wisdom, and what that really means is at a certain point, a person has to do the work of saying, is what I believe based on my childhood interpretations that's still guiding my behavior. If I don't seek to turn it around and allow a truthful belief to guide me, then this will not endure. I won't succeed. In other words, for a person who puts guiding, limiting beliefs before God's truth, they won't succeed. And that really is the purpose of life, that the very God who creates a great deal of confusion about our intrinsic worth due to the fact that our environment creates salient memories that form beliefs that guide our behavior, then it's up to us to use our free will and say, wait a second, am I going to be guided totally by false beliefs? Or am I going to know God is one, God loves me, for my sake, the world was created, God gave me unique qualities and brought me into a specific time in history to fulfill something that only I can fulfill based on my unique set of conditions, my unique temperament, my unique talents, my unique challenges, the things that I go through, that there's something only I can bring to the world. If I don't put that before my limiting beliefs, then it's true, I won't succeed. I'll believe something and I will basically find evidence for why it's true, and I'll continue to do it. I will follow my limiting beliefs. My brain will seek evidence, and I'll just manifest them again and again and again, unless I put the truth of God's love and God's belief in me before my wisdom or before what I think. And that's really why, one of the reasons why we're told to start our day with Moda Ani. Moda obviously comes from Toda, thank you. Okay, that's huge. Starting the day with real gratitude. Gratitude is the ultimate redirection of negativity. You remember how much you have, how much good is, infinite good is yours already. But Moda also comes from Lahodot, which means I admit, I acknowledge. Lahodot means to admit or acknowledge. And then you say, Moda Ani, I acknowledge. Moda Ani lefanecha. I accept, I admit, I acknowledge before you, Melech Chai v'Kayam, O living King, shehechezarta bi, that you returned my soul, be inside of me, bechemla, with compassion, Rabbah emunatecha, great is your faithfulness in me. So in essence, one of the things that this is bringing to light is that we begin our day with the acknowledgement, I admit it, I acknowledge that I'm here for a reason, and God is keeping me alive because there's something only I can do. And I put that before my pursuits for the day. I build my building of my day with the acknowledgement of God's giving me another day out of his love and belief in me. So it's one of the reasons we say Moda Ani the moment we return to consciousness, because without the basis of Hashem, you created me, I'm absolutely worthy, you totally love me, and I can trust that love, and my worth is absolute. If you don't put that at the beginning of all your pursuits, then your pursuits won't materialize. Because ultimately, when we believe negative things about ourselves, I'm not smart enough, I'm not talented enough, nobody listens to me, nobody respects what I have to say. When a person believes false limiting beliefs about themselves, they react to those beliefs. If I'm not important enough, then I might as well just shut down and watch Netflix and not try. In other words, when we believe something negative about ourselves, we react by materializing the very behavior that causes that belief in the first place. It continues it and continues it. But when we believe the truth about ourselves, that we're capable and we're smart enough and we are so much more powerful than we know, then when we believe that, we act accordingly. So that is really what the verse really means. For a person who isn't clear about the truth of self and world and seeks to accumulate wisdom or any sort of pursuit without that knowledge at the basis, no success, or counterfeit success, but not real happiness, not real achievement in the true sense of the word. But for a person who puts God's truth before their efforts, then this will endure because it's built on truth. So even in our day, the very, very, very first word that we say is, I acknowledge. I acknowledge. I acknowledge that there is an order to this world. Yiras chet, chachma. True commitment to God's world, God's truth, God's morality, on which I predicate my pursuit of everything that I do. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, then we always need to ask, you know, my Rebbe Santorsky used to say the words, she used to say that before you do anything, to ask the question, would God be comfortable in this? Would God be comfortable in this conversation? Would God be comfortable in this, whatever? Meaning to say that I have the ability to do a check-in with myself, because by nature, I'm so driven toward what I want to be true, that God gives me the ability to check in my desires with the touch point of absolute morality. And then I know, oh, this is something that will endure. If I don't do it, then it won't endure. And it's very hard to see, just like somebody who lived in the midst of the Greek Empire, or the midst of the Ottoman Empire, or the midst of Nazi Germany, or the midst of the Roman Empire, or the midst of the great Egyptian Empire. If you lived in the midst of it, it was so strong and sensual and powerful. It could never, it was might makes right, and it was so mighty. And then it imploded. It's the same thing on a personal level. If we seek to pursue things that aren't grounded in truth, they will ultimately backfire on us. And don't be fooled if you're in the midst of your own personal Egyptian empire, meaning even if it looks good, if it's not predicated on truth, it isn't good. It isn't good. It might look good. You might be in the midst of your own Egyptian empire. It looks fantastic. Everyone's saying it's right, so it must be right. But is it right? That's the hard work that we have to do. It involves a lot of bravery, but it's basically the order of life that will allow us to build a world, both personally and collectively, that will last, that will endure. Just like MS endures, it will endure. So it's something to think about before Rosh Hashanah too. Okay, let's open it up with our last 13 minutes and hear anybody's thoughts.
Allie.
Hi, Stace.
Hello. Yeah, you know, I couldn't help but think about your example of the Egyptian empire crumbling, and I very easily can relate to what's happening right now in our lives here in America, where and I don't want to talk politics, but there's such a loud voice of what I think are falsehoods about, you know, what went on a couple of years ago of our election. And you say the truth endures. And I heard you say falsehood crumbles,
Right.
and teeters.
That's right.
And I can't help but it's funny. I still have such anxiety about what goes on around me, right? With the world we're living in right now. And I feel like I'm always teetering because of very loud voices of, I do believe, thanks to courts and judges, there are still an everyday noise about falsehoods. And I just wonder what your advice would be to how when you're surrounded by such a loud voice of falsehoods. Yeah. How do you not teeter yourself and crumble? I feel so unstable.
Yeah, you feel unstable in such an unstable world.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I'll say two things that come to my mind, and then I'd really like to open it up to the group. The first thing I want to say is, if you think about a parent and a child, that or any relationship for that matter, but let's say the parent-child relationship, as long as a parent is calm and centered and responsive, then the child can have their tantrum. And ultimately, the worst thing that a parent can do, which we've all done, so don't feel guilty about it, is mirror the instability of the child by reacting to the child with the parent's own reactions. Don't you yell at me, right? Everyone's done it. But the idea is the parent in their own anxiety is mirroring the instability of the child, and then there's two unstable forces. So the best gift that the parent can give the child is to remain calm and responsive as opposed to reactive, mirroring the reactivity of the child. So that allows the child to say, I'm unstable, but I trust that the world is stable, like that is ultimately stable because mom is stable. By the way, don't be hard on yourself. Everyone's struggled with this. So so you stay grounded, you stay connected to your deepest values. And I would also just say, continue to learn Torah. Because I think the more you ground yourself in values that don't change, with the times, because everybody thinks that their view is the right way. I mean, everybody, the right thinks they're right, the left thinks they're right, everyone in their culture thinks that they're right. Everyone thinks that their view is the right way. It's the nature of the human being. So grounding yourself in Torah allows you to ground yourself in truth that doesn't change, which allows you to feel more stable in a world that's changing at such a rapid pace. And it is also important. I read it's not exactly what you're talking about, but I read a quote from Isaac Asimov, who said, I'm going to get the exact quote wrong, but he said, and of course he wrote in, I don't know, the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s. He said that what is it? I can't remember when he wrote something like that. That the pace of technological change, of course, he lived before the digital revolution, right? So far outstrips man's wisdom and ability to use that technology responsibly. In other words, the world is moving so fast, but it's outpacing so significantly our ability to use it wisely. So our wisdom is here and our technology is racing forward, and we don't have the vessels to use it responsibly. So the two things that I want to say to you is ground yourself in Torah learning, because then you're grounding yourself in a wisdom that doesn't change. And also remember that the nature of any dynamic is that when one stays stable, stability will result. But when the stable force mirrors the instability and becomes unstable also, then instability reigns. It's true with a parent and child where they're screaming at each other and the result is horrible. But if a parent can stay grounded, then everything can return to equilibrium. So your job is to stay grounded by learning, by sticking to values that are right and correct and solid.
Right, thank you.
You know, yes, anyone, but I talk to talk. So let's open it up to the group here. Hi, Todd.
So this is kind of a bookend concept, because Psalm 111:10 says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God.
Yes.
And so this seems to be the other end of the spectrum, which is the end of wisdom is also the fear of God as well, because the end of wisdom is what ultimately lasts. And I guess the basic theory of monotheistic ethics is you have to have a basis behind your ethics that's rooted in God in order to have something that doesn't change, as you're saying.
Correct.
And just like the Three Little Pigs, if you build your house on sand, ultimately your house isn't going to last.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's right. If you build your house on sand or straw, it will not last. That's right. Even though you might be in the middle of your Egyptian empire, it might look like it's going to last, but ultimately it won't last.
Eve, Hannah. Hi.
Whoops, Hannah, make sure you mute yourself. Hannah Anderson, make sure you mute yourself.
Yeah, I'm mute. I'm not muted.
Uh-oh.
I mean,
Can
can you
someone
hear
write
me?
that down?
Can you
Hannah,
hear
just
me?
mute. Hannah, just mute yourself.
I want to say something.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking on the phone. I can't see you
No,
though.
I would never, Ellie, I would never do that to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Oh, sorry, Hannah. Go. Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that when you talk about Torah, okay, it took me a long time to realize that when you talk about living Torah, that does not mean the 5 books of Moses. It means anything that you do good. So maybe you want to spend like maybe a couple minutes just explaining to some of the ladies, and especially also to me, what is exactly, when you say you have to live Torah, what does it exactly mean to have a life of Torah?
Well, let's look at something else you said, which is how do we define what good is? In other words, we can say we do good, but there is no human being that doesn't think that what they're doing because it's good. So good, subjectively defined, is not so clear, even in our society. Even in our very polarized society, without getting political, what we'll call good can often be at total odds with each other. And there's truth to both sides. So what is good? We have to understand that, even to Todd's point, even building good on a house of sand, that good won't last if it's not rooted in our ethical monotheistic tradition. But you're right, learning Torah isn't just learning the Parsha of the week. It's learning, of course, all of the oral law that springs from it, and all of the books and the commentaries and modern commentaries that make up what's called the Torah Hashkafa, which means the Torah worldview. It's not just studying text, it's also discussing text, it's learning text and understanding the worldview of what's called the Sinitic tradition, which is the tradition from Sinai, passed on until today. So faithfully until today. So with all of its modern interpretation, it is the Torah worldview that we're talking about. So that is just like what we're learning today. We're learning Pirkei Avot, which is learning Torah, which is learning the Torah perspective of the values that don't change. So when Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa says, a person who puts fear or awe or transcendent truth, the truth of God, before their knowledge, it will last. He's saying this for all time. He's telling us something for all time. This is the Torah Hashkafa. This is the Torah worldview. So that maybe that's answering your question a little bit. Hi. Yes, Todd. Hi.
I don't know who saw the PBS special last night, the Ken Burns thing on the Holocaust.
Heard about it.
I thought it was fascinating. It really focused heavily on what was going on in the United States and the views in the United States that were either reflecting what was going on in Nazi Germany or actually served as the basis for what was going on in Nazi Germany. And it astounded me how many of the views you saw that the Nazis had that were prevalent in the United States in the 20s. Certainly the idea of, the Germans wanted to, Lebensraum, they wanted to go west, well, go east as the case may be. They modeled that on what we did here. We went west and removed the native peoples. The whole idea of, limiting immigration. Big battle, obviously, today. But again, you saw that in the 20s as a reaction to economic forces and what have you. But so many of the patterns, and particularly the anti-Semitism that you saw in Nazi Germany, was prevalent in the United States. Henry Ford had the second most popular newspaper at the time, and there were just dozens and dozens and dozens of stories about, the international Jew wanting to take over the world. And these were the same ideas that Hitler picked up on in the 1920s when he was in prison, when he wrote Mein Kampf. So it's fascinating.
By the way, to Todd's point, on another note, if you want to read a very depressing but different, but also really striking book about the Israeli response to the Holocaust during and after the Holocaust, you're not going to be thrilled to read it, but it's disturbing. But it's called The Seventh Million by Tom Segev, and it's about the Israeli response while the Holocaust was happening and after the Holocaust. It's not so pretty. So it's different than what you're saying, Todd, but it's very, very intense, very interesting. Yeah, Susie. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I don't have my phone. Larry took my phone to be fixed, but I was sent an article about Ben-Gurion's perspective of what was going on at the end of the Holocaust versus Roosevelt's perspective and what the United States was doing. And from the little that I had a chance to look at it this morning, that I believe the belief of this author, and based on what quotes from Ben-Gurion, that obviously we know the United States didn't go far enough to save the Jews, but this article also says that Ken Burns didn't go far enough in talking about the responsibility of particularly, I think, the United States and how they didn't live up to their responsibility. And I'm sorry I don't have the article, but I can send it to you when I get my phone back, Ellie, and you can disseminate it.
No, send it to Julie. Send it to Julie.
Okay.
She'll post it. Oh, I still owe you guys the prayer for the welfare of the government. I'm so sorry. I just remembered that.
I also think that what Stacy said before, I think most of us are feeling is the teetering of the American democracy because of all the falsehoods that are being perpetuated on many fronts, and we don't really know what's true and what's not true. We think we know, but I think that I don't think she's isolated in feeling very concerned about the American democracy and where we're going to be. And I think that the reality is, it could go either way, but we could go by the wayside like all these other great empires. We have too many of the signs, too many of the goalposts of deterioration that are evident. And I hope that's not the case, but I'm feeling more and more like it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you're alone.
Well, I was trying to say that I don't think Stacy was alone, because I don't think anybody really responded to her. And I feel similarly in terms of that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, next week, I think we can't have class because I think the world's under renewal of its contract. It's Rosh Hashanah. So we got to get our priorities straight. The world's got to get renewed. So remember this as you go into Rosh Hashanah. What is at the basis, not just of policy and knowledge, but myself and my decisions? What is my GPS? This is really like setting your GPS. That's really what Rosh Hashanah is all about, is getting clear of who is the king of the world and what it means to have a king of the world. And it really is not so different at all than our Mishnah, which is to set your GPS as you go into your day or as you pursue your pursuits, predicated on truth and godly morality. And that's exactly what we're doing on Rosh Hashanah. We are literally setting our GPS to orient ourselves as we go through the week culminating in Yom Kippur. We are literally setting our GPS to the King of Kings. And then going through this intense period of time. It's actually very, very similar. So I want to wish all of you an amazing, amazing new year filled with blessing for the world, for blessing for each of our families, and blessings for the family of humanity. That we should all, that this should be a year of shalom, of true peace for mankind. We're ready for something good.
Amen.
Amen. Thank
All
you,
right.
Ellie.
All right, sending love to all.
Thank you.
Not to to you and the
Shana
whole
Tova.
Mishpacha.